All right, welcome back to Developer Roadmaps. Today, we are digging into the absolute foundation of web layout, the CSS box model. Seriously, if you've ever found yourself staring at your screen wondering, why won't this element line up, or where's this weird spacing coming from? Well, this explainer is for you. Let's jump right in.
So, in our last explainer, we had a lot of fun splashing paint around, right? We gave our elements life with colors and backgrounds. But here's the thing. Before you can paint a house, you need to understand its structure. And that's exactly what we're doing today. We're drawing the blueprint that defines every single element on the page.
So here's our game plan. We're going to start with that core blueprint, the box model. From there, we'll learn how to set its dimensions, how to frame it with borders, give it some depth with shadows, and finally, we'll get familiar with all the different measuring tapes, or CSS units, that we can use to build our layouts.
Okay, first stop on our roadmap, the box model. And I can't stress this enough, this is the core concept of CSS. Everything you see on a web page, everything, from text and images to those little div containers, is treated as a rectangular box. Getting this down is absolutely non-negotiable for building great layouts.
This right here is the anatomy of every single one of those boxes. At the very center, you have your content, the text, the image, whatever it is you're showing. Then, wrapping around that, you have padding, which gives your content some breathing room on the inside. After that comes the border, which is the frame around both the content and the padding. And finally, on the very outside, you have the margin. This is the invisible space that pushes other elements away.
So let's get this straight, because it trips a lot of people up. Padding is the space inside the box. Think of it like stuffing or cushion inside a package. And you'll notice the background color of the element actually fills up the padded area. Margin, on the other hand, is the space outside the box. It's like an invisible force field that keeps elements from bumping into each other. It's always transparent. Oh, and a quick heads up. When you stock elements, their top and bottom margins don't add together. The browser just picks the biggest one and uses that. It's a quirky little thing called margin collapse.
Okay, here is a classic trap that gets almost every new developer. By default, if you set a box to be, say, 200 pixels wide, and then you add some padding and a border, the box actually becomes wider than 200 pixels. It can totally wreck your layout. The solution, and trust me, this is a lifesaver, is box sizing border box. This one little line tells the browser, hey, whatever width I give you, make sure the padding and border fit inside that width. It makes everything so much more predictable.
All right, we understand the structure of the box. Now let's talk about how we actually control its size with dimensions.
So you could set a fixed width in pixels, but what happens when someone looks at your site on a phone? That fixed width can cause content to get cut off and you get that ugly horizontal scroll bar. A much better approach for modern responsive web design is to use max width. This lets the element shrink down to fit smaller screens, but it puts a ceiling on how big it can get on larger monitors. It keeps everything readable and your layout looking clean. So, we've built the box, we've sized it, now let's actually draw the lines that make it visible and give it some definition. Let's talk borders and outlines.
Now, this comparison is so important. A border is part of the box model. It has a real thickness, it takes up space, and if you add one, it could literally push other elements around on the page. An outline, though, it's like a visual ghost. It's drawn on top of the box completely outside of the layout. It doesn't affect the position of anything. This makes it perfect for things like accessibility focus indicators, or, my favorite, for debugging your layout when you can't figure out why something isn't lining up.
And of course, we're not always making perfectly sharp boxes. A super simple border radius property lets you round off those corners. It's a small touch that can give your design a much softer, more modern feel.
Okay, now for a little bit of visual magic. Box shadows are how we create that sense of depth and hierarchy, making some elements feel like they're floating just above the page.
I know the syntax can look a little intimidating at first, but it's really logical. The first two numbers are your X and Y offsets, how far right and how far down the shadow goes. The third value is the blur radius. That's what makes the edges soft and fuzzy. The fourth one is the spread, which basically grows or shrinks the shadow before it gets blurred. And then, of course, you have the color. And you can get really creative with this. If you add the inset keyword, it flips the shadow to the inside of the box, making it look pressed in. But the really powerful trick is layering multiple shadows. You just separate each shadow's values with a comma. This lets you create incredibly subtle and realistic depth effects. And just remember, the first shadow you list is always the one that appears on top.
So far, we've been saying pixels a lot, but that's just one tool in the toolbox.
To really master our layouts, we need to understand all the different CSS units we have available. Let's look at our measuring tapes.
It really breaks down into two main types. You've got your absolute units, like pixels. They're fixed. A 100-pixel box is going to try its best to be 100 pixels wide no matter what. Then you have relative units. These are flexible. Their actual size depends on some other value, like the size of the element they're inside or even the size of the browser window itself.
Okay, let's break down the most important ones. Percentages are based on the size of their parent container. Viewport units, VW for width and VH for height, are tied directly to the size of the browser window. Then you have M and REM. Now, M is relative to its parent's font size, which can be tricky to manage. That's why REM is pretty much the gold standard for accessible design. It stands for root M, and it's always relative to the font size of the main HTML element. This is huge because it means if a user increases their browser's default font size, your entire layout can scale up perfectly with it.
And you can give your sizing superpowers with CSS functions. Calc lets you do actual math right in your style sheet. You can set a width to something like 100% minus 50 pixels, which is amazing. And functions like min, max, and clamp give you even more fine-grained control, letting your design adapt fluidly between minimum and maximum sizes. So let's just take a moment to mark this checkpoint on our developer journey. You now have the fundamental knowledge of how every single element is structured, how to control its size and space, and how to style its frame and give it depth. This is a massive step.
But of course, building the individual boxes is only half the story. The next big question on our roadmap is, how do we get them to play nicely together and arrange them on the page?
So in our next explainer, we're going to dive deep into how these boxes actually behave and interact with each other. We'll be covering the crucial display property, the different types of positioning, and how to control which elements appear on top of others using the z-index stacking context.
This is Developer Roadmaps. Map your path, build your career.